I gotta say, that question you ask is brilliant. Do you like being bored or do you like to be stressed? Because at the end of the day, startup world is stressful for everybody, not just the founder.
It's great to learn from your mistakes. It's even better to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yes,
So,
I
I
like
mean,
that.
I don't know if that's my favorite quote, but that's what it really puts my mind. I think it's really relevant for startup founders.
Welcome, everybody, to the Founders Korner. Today's episode, I have a very intriguing and interesting guest for you. His name is Karl Swanepoel, and he is the CEO of freelancer, and he is a serial entrepreneur. He's started his own company as a kid, started it up, worked through it, and now he's working on this current project. And I'm super excited to introduce him because he has so much to say about startup life, how to build startup teams, effective teams especially. So I'm very excited for him to share some of his knowledge with you guys as the startup community. So let's welcome Karl. Karl, welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for coming. So Karl, I always like to start. Where did you come from? What was your starting position? Like, tell us everything.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from South Africa. I kind of lived there for about 10 years, then moved to Germany and then to the UK. I realized at quite a young age that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I remember quite distinctly when I was 13, I don't know why, but I remember deciding quite firmly that I never wanted to work for anyone else. And, I'd only ever be happy and fulfilled working for myself.
It's kind of hard working for other people when you have a serial mindset, right? So I get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, growing up, all kinds of experiences just reinforced that enough that I didn't encounter anything that, disproved it. So I guess I was right about that. Yeah. And I mean, today, I'm the founder and CEO of freelancer. I've been running the company for nearly 2.5 years now. I started it in my final year of university. So it was very much like a dorm room project. And then we raised our pre-seed fund shortly after I graduated. But, I think worth mentioning as well that for the past 10 years since I was trying various different projects, building various different businesses, most of them went nowhere. A couple of them went somewhere,
Yeah.
but nothing. Everything kind of led up to Revolancer today.
Awesome. So you being such a young entrepreneur and just kind of growing with the emotions and everything involved and realizing you can't work for other people, because I also was in the same boat where I started as a very young age, right? I started when I was in my second year of university and I started my first company, and I was with that for 10 years. So how was the life? Like give me your life cycle, right? Cuz I can tell you, like, from my perspective, like there was a lot of ups and a lot of downs. I would say more downs than ups, but I enjoyed the ups more. But but how was your experience as a startup entrepreneur?
I think with everything in life, there are ups and downs. But I think with the startup life, it's like the ups are much sort of higher than
Yeah.
most people's lives, I'd like to think.
Yeah.
And then same thing with the downs. It's just a lot more extreme in both directions.
Yes.
It's definitely not for everyone. It is for me. I
Yeah.
think it's probably not for most people, and there's no shame in that whatsoever. I think like really important thing is to understand yourself and understand what actually drives you and fulfills you. But yeah, it's absolutely, I think, very similar to your experience. Been a lot of probably more downs than ups, but it's been a kind of a roller coaster. But I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So I'm with you, because like those ups are like very exciting. The downs are very extreme, but like you kind of work through it, right? Like you're quite driven in your mission or whatever. The big question is, like, if you were to give any advice to any startup, to any founder specifically, like how do you tell them? Because I have this conversation all the time with people through our workshop. And it's always like, I always say just like, you have to have grit. And that's like a super easy way for me to just kind of explain what I'm trying to explain. But like, how would you explain, like, you just have to kind of work through it? Because right now I find a lot of startups, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. A lot of startups end up kind of going into startup world, kind of seeking the fame rather than the grind. And it's exactly what you said, right? You have to understand yourself before you get into it. And a lot of people, I don't think, understand themselves, and they get into it and then they quit after 6 months or a year, because it is a grind. It is an absolute grind.
Personally, I think you're going to have a really hard time if you're motivated primarily by things like money or fame or attention.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you won't get anywhere ever under any circumstances, but I think you have a much higher chance of getting further if you're actually driven by the solving the problem that your company is setting out to solve, which as a former freelancer, I very much am. So I'd say that's a really important thing. Another question that I came up with actually that I think, it's a very simple question, but it gives you a really good idea whether being a founder is like the right fit for someone. And that's the question, would you rather be bored or would you rather be stressed?
Oh,
And
okay. I like that.
most people would rather be bored than stressed, but I think founders like myself would rather be stressed than bored.
Wow, that's actually a solid question because as soon as you asked me that, I was like stressed. I would hate to be
Yeah.
bored. That would drive me nuts. Holy crap, that's a really good way of looking at it, actually. That's an excellent question. I'll ask that question. I'll say, I learned that from Carl.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that's a good question because you're right. At the end of the day, we are typically good at staying stressed, but managing that stress very easily. Not easily, but like, you know what I mean. Easier than others. The ones that like to be
Sure.
bored. Right? And we're able to juggle, I think also one of the things I always look for in founders is how many things can you juggle at once? Because at the end of the day, we are thrown into a world of, here's 1,000 things you have to think about. Here's 1,000 things you got to handle all at once. How do you, like, at the end of the day, team becomes a major factor, right? And you and I have talked about, the importance of team and hence your entire company, the freelancer concept, because sometimes you just can't hire full-time staff. So how do you suggest like a founder looking at potentially bringing on freelancers, potentially bringing on employees? How do you wear the multiple hats and how do you judge someone based on the ability to be able to wear multiple hats?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think kind of as a founder, and especially as a founder taking the CEO role, you kind of need to be the kind of person who does well in a really chaotic environment.
Yeah.
Just like managing so many different things. And I mean, that's just kind of how I work normally. I have absolute chaos going on in my head all the time. I
Yeah.
have ADHD,
Yeah.
and I think that lines up really well with entrepreneurship. But ultimately, when it comes to building a great team, is you have to find, I think the biggest mistake to make is to, try and be smarter or better than everyone you hire. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing you need to do is like let go of any kind of ego and understand that, what you should be driven by is giving the company the best chance of succeeding by hiring the best people.
Yep.
And if you hire people who are better than you at certain things, then that's great. Because if
Yep.
they weren't there, then the company wouldn't be better at those things. So I think that's a really important step that a lot of the founders that I speak to don't really, actually
No, they don't.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
really important one. But then also, like hiring people who think differently. So maybe hiring people who you don't necessarily agree with on everything. But I think the worst thing you can do is hiring people who are exactly like you, because then you are just doubling
Complacent.
up certain
Yeah.
strengths. Yeah.
Yeah. Complacency. Yeah, it's the whole concept of you want to be the dumbest person in the room, right? If you're the smartest in the room,
Absolutely.
you're in the wrong room concept. And as much as that's a cliche, that is at the end of the day a very important, in my opinion, a very important rule of thumb, especially when it comes to startup world. I mean, in terms of if you're the bored kind of person and you like corporate world, that may not be necessarily true because you need to be the smartest person in the room to look good to move forward, right? That's kind of the world of corporate, at least. That's why we don't like it. I feed off of this podcast strictly by talking to more intelligent people like you and learning from you. That's what I love, right? So I love that you
Yeah,
said
for
that,
sure.
and then bringing it back though. So this is one thing I'll say. I think most startups, the reason they don't hire the more intelligent people is strictly because they don't think they can afford it, or not even they don't think, they may know that they can't afford it. So how do you fight the battle between, cash flow? Because that is a huge thing. Because the good people are typically not cheap. They're not. At the end of the day, they're probably one of the more pricier investments you're making. And your hope is like, for example, if I'm investing $100,000 in a really solid marketing person, my hope and dream is that they'll give me 5, 6x return on revenue. So how do you make that judgment call, one, and then two, how do you decide, okay, I have the money, and what if you don't have the money?
Yeah, sure. So I think also just another thing worth mentioning on the intelligence point, I think personally that it's pretty much impossible to actually compare people just based on, quote, intelligence. I think
Yeah.
really with this saying of like being the smartest person in the room, or like, sorry, like being trying to be the dumbest person in the room, it's not really to do with intelligence as much as like, let's say if you bring on a developer, then they better be a better developer than you. Or you bring
Yeah.
on a marketing person, they need to be better at marketing. It doesn't mean they need to be smarter or better at
Yeah.
everything. It's
Yeah.
just like they need to be better in their area than you.
Agreed.
Yeah, in terms of like finding and motivating the right people, I think having a really good company culture is important, but definitely hiring people who are primarily driven by the sort of vision and mission of the company
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. Um, you'll find lots of people who are only driven by the money, but they're probably not going to be good, long term. Because for a startup, because let's say you can just about stretch to pay them 100,000 a year, and then in, I don't know,
Yeah.
3 months time they want to raise,
Yeah.
and the last thing I'll say is ideally you need all of the like core talent in your team. So for example, if you're a tech company, you need to have someone as a founder who can build your MVP. It doesn't mean they
Yep.
can necessarily just build everything forever, but they definitely need to be able to build your MVP. And if marketing is a key part of your company, then I'd say having a CMO in the founding team is also really important. And that's another way that you can motivate people, like giving them a co-founder title,
Yep.
giving them options, that sort of.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative ways like stock options. And I actually, I got to say, that question you ask is brilliant. Do you like being bored or do you like to be stressed? Because at the end of the day, startup world is stressful for everybody, not just the founder. It's everybody's
Oh
pressure,
yeah.
right? Like no one's bored at a startup. If you're bored, you're in the wrong place, or your startup is kind of not doing so hot. But in reality, you're right. It is at the end of the day a role of where you want to find someone who's not financially driven but more purpose driven, right? I think that's the best way to look at
Yeah,
it is
absolutely.
is do you have purpose in what I'm trying to build? And I think it comes down to, look, I always tell in this podcast too, um, in terms of like a founder, what they need to be able to do and the abilities, obviously leadership, sure, we'll go with that, right? Like you have to have that to be able to lead a team or even have the team just follow you. But that to me is vision. So you have to be able to sell the vision and you have to be able to sell the product. Those are my two biggest things about founders. If you can't do those two things, don't be a founder, because you can't hire a sales guy that can sell better than you, because theoretically at the early stage you're selling a vision to people, right? Because
Yeah.
you really don't have a product. The product is kind of MVP. It's more of a, excuse my language, but shit show more than an actual product, right? And you need people to join in the vision of what you're trying to build. So in my opinion, the founder needs to have those two things. If you have marketing capabilities, amazing. But if you don't, I agree, you need a good marketing person, a solid marketing person. And that's where I kind of go back to freelancing, because again, sometimes you cannot hire a full-time or you don't even have enough work for a full-time person. How do you choose amazing freelancers? Because when you talk to people that have done freelancers, and I know you guys do it differently, so I would love to hear your perspective on it. When you do freelancers, a lot of people have a lot of mistrust. Like there's literally, I would actually, not even mistrust, just no trust, right? They have no trust in the other person. It's a very like sensitive subject, right? A lot of people hate freelancers. A lot of people dislike freelancers. They've had bad experiences with freelancers. So how do you approach freelancers? Because it does have a huge impact on a business, especially when you can just have a part-time person instead of a full-time.
I mean, and I think, to be honest, that a lot of this negativity around freelancing is actually not really even the fault of freelancers, but it's the fault of incumbent platforms.
Yeah,
Platforms
I agree.
who take an enormous cut of the freelancer's earnings, which, and then as a client, how can you expect value for money if the platform's taking 25% of it?
Yep.
And because they're taking 25% of it, they're stopping you from video calling with the freelancer. So how can you actually get a
Yeah.
good feeling of the freelancer? How can you
Yeah.
explain the project properly?
Well, because
So
they're
it's
worried
just
about you
between
getting
that.
off the platform, right? Exactly. They try to take control of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't charge a commission fee. We therefore allow you to video call and talk off platform. So, that's quite an easy solution to those
Wow.
problems that
Okay.
no one else seems to have thought of before us. But yeah, it's essentially, I think working with freelancers is great. In terms of evaluating a freelancer, there are two key things I would look out for. Like, number one is just a track record of their work, because there are some people who are just great at selling but won't actually do anything useful. So
I've
just
seen a
look
lot
at
of
the
those.
past projects they did. Me too. I'm pretty good at spotting them now.
How do you, okay,
But just
so
look.
going back to that, just so, sorry, Carl, just to interrupt, but going back to that, how do you sniff those guys out? Like, I know it's hard to sniff them out because they're good at selling, right? Like, they're very good at selling themselves. But like, is there a way to like kind of be like, oh no, you're all talk and no action?
So yeah, I'd say, like, largely for me at this point, it's gut feel. I can have
Okay.
a pretty good gut feel about spotting people like that. One thing that I think, if you don't yet have a good gut feeling for spotting people like that, one key thing is if they talk about a project that they were involved in and talk about kind of, like, these great
Yeah.
outcomes. Just ask them to elaborate, keep asking questions. So, like, how did you do this? How did you solve this?
Got it.
And then just kind of find out, like, how much were they actually involved? How much do they really understand what they're talking about? I think that's probably the best kind of starting point.
Yeah,
But also just understanding that sometimes if it's too good to be true, then, well, it's
it
too good
might
to be
be.
true.
And you know what? It's kind of funny you say that because I would say most founders don't actually know the right questions to ask, right? They do stick to very much the gut feeling. I think that's partially because they don't have enough time to think about it. So they're just like, yeah, sounds good. You look good. Let's do it. But I find reviews quite misleading, we'll call it, right? Where it's
They
like,
can be, certainly.
right? Where it's like, they'll send you a thing, hey, like, can I put this? Here's your statement. Like, sometimes they write the statement for me, and I hate that. I know a lot of people will just be like, okay, cool, thank you for doing that. Like, yeah, go ahead, post it, because you just took away from the fact that I have to do it. But like, yeah, no one's really that honest, because you're like thinking, okay, if I'm too honest, then I might not be able to work with this guy again. He was okay enough that I'll use him again, but he wasn't amazing by any means. But so, yeah, okay. So you just have to ask the right questions is really what you're saying at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think there's also a kind of difference between review and testimonial. Like, just looking at people's, like, ratings on a platform. I mean, it can tell you something, but it sometimes maybe doesn't tell the full story. But ask people for testimonials, like, something with a bit more detail to it, like about a
Right.
specific project from a client, which they're probably less likely to just sign off on or be happy to provide if they don't mean it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, I agree with that. Sorry, I did interrupt you while you were saying how to basically pick out freelancers.
Yeah, no problem at all. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's similar to hiring people for, like, a full-time role. You just need to chat with the person, see if you think it would be a good fit. But also, something to keep in mind is another quote that I really kind of live and operate by, which is hire slow, fire fast. Like, take your
Hires.
time finding and selecting the right people.
Yeah,
The second you figure out they're not the right fit,
get rid of
don't
it.
give them endless
Yeah.
chances. Just
Yeah.
get rid of them ASAP.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that goes for freelancers, employees, whatever you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, if you take your time with them, A, it's the capital you don't have, and B, it's not fitting. It has to, like, you're already dealing with so much around you as a startup, as a founder. You really don't have the time to deal with anything on the outside, right?
Absolutely. It's an opportunity cost. If you give someone a fourth chance, if they've already failed you 3 times,
Yeah.
think about, you could get rid of them now and then find someone who gets it right the first time.
Yeah.
As soon as possible. So yeah.
Yeah. What would be your number one advice to a startup world? Like, like, again, you've been part of it, you've dealt with it, you've done the grind. what is your, like, if you were to meet a founder, I mean, aside from make sure you pick a good team, that's a standard. What would be your number one advice when it comes to software, in the software world for startups?
Ooh, I mean, I'd say like general advice would be, well, no, I suppose, starting with software, with specifically the software space. It's just understanding that the software and tech startup industry is very different to like pretty much any other startup
Yep,
space. So, for
fully.
example, um, sometimes people who will be looking to give you millions in funding will
Yeah,
actively want you to not make money,
yeah.
because you can
What
grow
is a business
faster in your
model? There is no
trajectory.
business model. Just grow.
Yeah, and so it's very weird and kind of confusing if you compare
Yeah,
it to a traditional business mindset. So I think it's just if you're new in the software, or at least the sort of tech startup space,
yeah,
then being aware that a lot of what you think might be logical with business does not apply in the space, even though there are other logical reasons for this, of course. But it's just really being mindful of that, making sure you understand the kind of industry. Because I see a lot of founders trying to start tech companies who are obsessing over financial forecasts and all this
yep.
other nonsense, like charging users left, right, and center before anyone's even using them.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, financial reporting on SaaS software is I always say it in my workshop. I talk to any startup. They're always like, "Yeah, I don't know what to put for my financial reporting for the pitch deck." I'm like, "Doesn't matter." Like, what's your burn rate? That's all that matters. Is how fast are you burning through the cash? That's the critical aspect. Um, your revenue, I'm gonna pretend like you get nothing for 6 months. You know what I mean? I'm pretending like you make nothing for a year almost. So you just have to survive on that 1 year. But I agree with you on that. It is a different world. I do think the model or the world has kind of shifted a little bit. There's less free cash floating
Oh,
around. I
definitely
think I think
recently, yes.
yeah, I think with like prior to COVID or even a little bit during the COVID, um, it was a wild, wild west. My God, everyone, like, especially from Silicon Valley side, you can walk on the street and somehow raise $1 million on a $10 million valuation, and you're just like, who are you? And he's like, it could be a previous CTO, but I do think the business model now, like now they're kind of like putting more pressure on startups on the road to profitability. Before they didn't
Yeah.
care about the road to profitability. Before it was how fast can you scale. And in my opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is my opinion is the reason they're looking at that model now is because before technological adoption was very low, relatively, right? Now, after the whole COVID thing, everyone went so heavy on digital and they upgraded their tech that, everyone went digital to the point where now you can be the fifth place. You can be fifth place in terms of industry lead and still be worth billions of dollars in the market
Yeah, it's a good
because the
point. Yeah.
market has grown that much, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think it's really important as a startup to be able to answer those difficult questions, because I think with
Yeah.
fundraising, I think founders can often get tunnel vision, like,
Yeah.
and sort of thinking like, what do I need to show to the investor for them to give me money? But that's really the
I'm going to be a
wrong way to think
unicorn,
about it.
right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, you need to focus on actually building your brand and making a lot of decisions that make sense
Yeah.
and learning from those decisions. And then, if you can demonstrate that, that's going to impress an investor far more than any kind of grandiose claims that you're just making because you think that's what they want to hear.
100%. Especially nowadays. Like I said, now that the cash has become tighter, don't get me wrong, a lot more VCs are investing into Series A now, because they're not cash hungry, whereas Series B, C, Ds are now super cash hungry. And investors are scared because they're like, I don't know if you can raise the next round. Like, if I give you money today, I don't know if you're going to be able to raise it in another 18 months. And it's very hard for them to roll it back, right? Because of the,
Absolutely.
severances they have to pay and like all these things. So it comes down to the concept of, how do you manage your startup and how do you predict road to profitability when you don't even know what your cash flow is going to look like. Does that kind of make sense? Like, what's your
Yeah,
advice
but
on
I
that side?
mean, well, pre-revenue financial forecasts are, kind
Shot
of,
in the dark, throwing a
yeah,
dart
I
at the
mean, you
board.
can you can kind of take the approach of being very logical about things, taking as many variables as you have, plugging it in, working out something really sophisticated, or just
It
entering
doesn't
random
work.
numbers into a
I've
spreadsheet,
tried that.
and
It
they'll
doesn't
probably
work.
be they'll be like equally accurate. So
Yeah.
most of my investors have not ever asked to see a financial forecast. Yeah, and it tends to be the more experienced angel investors too, who are just not interested because they know at this point they're buying more into kind of the vision and the team and these like less kind of tangible things, more buying into the dream, but it depends. Different investors want to see different things. So I think be prepared to produce something like this. Try and make it as accurate as you can, but understand that you're probably not really going to be able to make it accurate, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah. And to be frank, like I have a 4-step motto for angel investors, and it's none of it is financial, right? It's
Yeah, of
number
course.
one is timing of the product. Like, why is the timing right today for you to do this? The second one is I always tell founders all the time, you're not special. You don't, your idea is not unique. I guarantee you someone else in the world has that exact same idea. The biggest thing is why you're the person to execute it,
Of
right?
course.
And a lot of times I talk to angels, they'll be like, I hear the same idea 2 or 3 times sometimes. And
Yeah.
it's like, I'm choosing based on who, if I like the idea, if I believe everything about the idea, I'm looking at who's probably going to succeed at it rather than anything else. So 2 is the person. 3 is the go to market strategy. So GTM strategy. Just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. And it's really hard to explain that to
Yeah.
founders. Like all founders are so ambitious and they're almost blinded by their own ambition. They're like, I'm changing the world. People are going to flock to me. It just makes sense. Where it's like, no, you still got to sell it. Like there's still selling to be done. And then fourthly is the product. So I'm
Yeah.
with you. Like even the fact that you just said your angels that haven't even asked you for forecasting, that doesn't surprise me at all because they shouldn't. It's just going to be wrong. Like I used all the variables you mentioned, right? I tried to be very holistic on the approach and very like calculated, where I was like, cold calling, the percentage of success is likely to be anywhere between 1 to 3%. I'm going to say 1 because I'm conservative, right? And I think our cold calling strategy worked maybe 0.1%, right? It's statistics. It's at the end of the day, there's some extremes on one side, extremes on the other, and then you got the balance of the middle. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, trying to predict cash flow or even sale pre-revenue is you're just focusing on the wrong thing, to be honest. You should just focus on how to sell this thing.
Oh,
Your GTM.
absolutely.
Your
Yeah, and of
JTM.
course, like actually building something that your users, like actually solving a real problem,
Yeah.
and building it where it's actually a solution that people want to use, because you could build something that solves a problem but people don't want to use it because it's too complicated or too expensive, or
Yeah.
the problem actually isn't that big.
I agree.
you know
So speaking of problem, because I agree with you, it's always going back to the problem, figuring out what it is that you're trying to solve for. You being a person who started your own thing and focusing around the problem that you sought out for because you were a freelancer, how did you approach the problem and how did you believe that, you're the guy to be able to do this?
Yeah. So actually, I think that I approached it wrong. I think that, well, I
You
mean,
learn. Yeah.
it worked out well, but I think a big part of that is luck.
Yeah.
So I was, setting out to solve problems that I experienced as a freelancer, and and luckily in one way, not so luckily in another way, very many freelancers experience those exact same problems. It's a very serious pain point, and that makes them want to use Revolancer. But it could have just as well been that these problems were not experienced by other freelancers because
Yeah.
very early on I didn't ask them,
Yeah.
or like really
Oh,
kind
you
of
made
trying to
that
validate
mistake.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I got lucky. I got
Yeah.
lucky initially. Now, obviously, that's changed. We do everything based on user feedback
Yeah.
and data. Um, but I didn't at the beginning, and that's something that I would do differently now.
So what I always tell my founders is go get a product advisory board of 5 potential customers that you're trying to target for, and just keep them in the loop of your product. So that avoids that problem you had. And I always tell them too is the reason you need grit is because every entrepreneur will tell you, or every founder will tell you, and I never want to take it away from them, because at the end of the day, they went through hardship to get to that luck, but you need the luck. There's always one
You
point
do,
in your
absolutely.
life where in the founder's world where you get lucky, and you just have to know how to convert on that luck. But at the end of the day, every single one of them you talk to, there was luck involved. Like it's just the reality of it.
It is, but also the more things you try,
Exactly.
the harder you work, the more people you speak to, the more opportunities you chase, the luckier you will become.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's exactly what I say. So that's why I'm saying grit, right? Because you got to keep putting yourself out there. You keep driving. The whole reason that people always say, work your butt off and it'll work out. The reason you work your butt off is because you're putting yourself in more opportunities to be successful. And the reason for that is meeting the right person, like you just said, or, like that's what it is. You can't expect to, even if you look at Facebook, it took them 5 years to even get to the level that they were even remotely famous, right? Of course, at that point, you become like a trajectory, right? But it took them 5 years. Like it's not like they did it overnight, right? So
Yeah, and they're one of the most successful companies in the world. So what about, like even a medium successful company? How long did it take them? And
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
it's
So you have to give it time. You have to be patient. You have to grind through it. And then, again, this is why I go with the word grit, because it's it's the perfect word to explain for what a founder is. Do you like being bored or stressed? Right? Like that's like those are the perfect terms for what needs to happen in order for you to be successful. So I'm with you on that.
yeah, 100%.
Put yourself out there. Yeah, exactly. I love that. So if I were to say, I don't know if you've read any books, if do you read a lot, Carl? I don't know if I know you got a couple
I
books in the
used to
background,
read.
so
I do. I have read all of them.
I know. So that's why I'm saying,
All three.
what book would you suggest to any startup that you believe should read, like that book?
Yeah, so the yellow one there, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, is definitely the number one I'd recommend to
Love
startup
that book
founders.
because it literally starts with the problem, and the problem is, what have you experienced in your life? Try it out, and it's a really good way to test it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
full of absolute. It's like really good advice. It's not that long
Yeah.
to read. So
No, it's a
it's
very short read, actually. I've read that
great.
book, so I love that book as well. Love it. Carl, thank you so much and your time for being here and giving the advice to the startup community. I know I can tell you they probably very much appreciate it because it's not a lot of information is out there for them. So really, really appreciate you being on the channel. Do you have any last minute comments that you would like to give to them, like a quote, your favorite quote or anything like that?
My favorite quote, and I'm probably going to paraphrase it here,
That's
but
okay.
Warren Buffett has a great quote where he says, "It's great to learn from your mistakes. It's even better to learn from other people's mistakes."
Yes,
So
I
I
like
mean,
that.
I don't know if that's my favorite quote, but that's what it really puts my mind. I think it's really relevant for startup founders, and that's a big reason why you want to bring advisors on, because you can learn from their mistakes and
Yeah,
experiences rather than having to do it all
do it all
yourself.
of. I always say, like, for us, Corridor, when you work with us, we've seen 1,000 ways a product can fail. We don't know the
Yeah.
formula to how to succeed, but we know 1,000 ways it's going to go wrong. So we can at least be, that's our experience that we're providing to you. So, no, I love that quote. One of my favorites, just so you know, is "Hope is not a strategy," and it's by Roderick Jefferson, who wrote the book on sales enablement. And I just love that
Yeah,
quote
that's
because hope, and that's what entrepreneurs are. It's a hope, for the strategy to work. So I always say, hope is not a strategy. Just keep grinding. That's the key here. Cool. Carl, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I know you're in the UK, so, you're making the time here for us. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Everybody else at home, thank you all for listening. If you have any thoughts, comments, or if you have any questions for Carl, leave a comment down below. We'll definitely translate that to him. Again, Karl with Revelance, you know, freelancers, check his website out. Karl, what is your website for you guys?
Yeah, so it's revelancer.com, or if you just Google Revelancer, then you should
Okay,
find it.
perfect. So there you have it. Check his site out. You can find some great freelancers there. And again, coming from the fact that they don't charge commission, you truly do get that one-on-one rather than you get freelancers from like Upworks who are just trying to finish the work as fast as possible to avoid the extra fees. So again, Karl, thank you for doing what you're doing, man. I appreciate it. Again, the startup world needs better freelancers. So I appreciate you providing such a service.
Absolutely. Thank you
Awesome.
very much.
Okay. Awesome. All right, everybody. Until next time, Corridor out.